A second chance for Charlie.
It was a freezing winter evening. The streets of the city, once lively and bustling, were now nearly empty as people rushed home to escape the bitter cold. Snowflakes drifted down from the dark sky, covering the sidewalks in a thin white blanket. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows over the quiet alleys. Amidst the frozen landscape, in a forgotten corner of the city, lay a tiny, frail puppy. His small body was curled up tightly against a trash bin, as if trying to shield himself from the cruel wind. His fur was dirty and matted, his ribs clearly visible beneath his thin skin. His breathing was slow and shallow, and his eyes once full of life were now dull and lifeless. For days, the puppy had wandered the streets, scavenging for food, hoping that someone might notice him. But the world was harsh for a creature so small and vulnerable. Every step had become more difficult as hunger and exhaustion drained the last of his strength. Whenever footsteps echoed nearby, he lifted his head slightly, hoping for kindness. But each time, people walked past, too busy or too indifferent to stop. He had given up crying for help. His voice had long since faded into silence. That night, as the cold tightened its grip on his tiny body, he stopped shivering. His exhausted eyes slowly began to close. This was it. He was too tired to fight anymore. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, fate intervened.
An unexpected savior.
Emma was on her way home from work. She had taken a shortcut through the alley to avoid the crowded streets, her thoughts lost in the events of the day. But as she walked past a dimly lit corner, something caught her eye, a small, motionless shape near the trash bin. At first, she thought it was just another pile of discarded garbage, but then she saw it move ever so slightly. Her heart clenched. She took a cautious step closer, and as she did, she realized what she was looking at: a puppy. A tiny, helpless puppy barely clinging to life. She knelt down, her breath visible in the freezing air. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered. The puppy's eyes flickered open for a brief moment. He let out a faint, weak whimper but didn't move. It was as if he had already accepted his fate. Emma hesitated for only a second before making a decision. She couldn't just leave him there. Carefully, she removed her warm scarf and wrapped it around the trembling puppy. As she lifted him into her arms, she felt his small body lean against her, as though he had finally found someone he could trust. Holding him close, she rushed toward the nearest veterinary clinic, hoping she wasn't too late.
The battle for life.
The vet, Dr. Jake, took one look at the puppy and shook his head gravely. "He's in a critical condition," he said. "Severely malnourished, dehydrated, and suffering from hypothermia, but we'll do everything we can." Emma sat in the waiting room, her fingers tightly gripping her coat. Every second felt like an eternity. She barely knew this little creature, yet she felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. After what felt like hours, Dr. Jake returned with a small smile. "He's weak, but he's fighting. We've given him fluids and warmth." The next 24 hours will be crucial. Relief flooded Emma's heart. She visited the puppy every day, watching as he slowly regained his strength. The first time he wagged his tail, it was barely noticeable, but to Emma, it was a miracle. After a week of treatment, Dr. Jake finally gave her the news she had been waiting for. "He's ready to leave," he said, "but he'll need special care and a loving home." Emma didn't even hesitate. "He already has one," she said, smiling.
A new beginning.
When she brought him home, she gave him a warm bath, carefully washing away the dirt and grime. Underneath, his fur was a beautiful golden brown. She wrapped him in a soft towel and held him close, feeling the warmth of his small body against her own. "You need a name," she murmured, gazing into his gentle brown eyes. After a moment of thought, she smiled. "Charlie, that suits you." At first, Charlie was cautious. He had spent his entire short life struggling to survive, and this warm, safe environment felt unfamiliar. The first night, he curled up in the corner of the room, watching Emma with weary eyes. But she was patient. She placed a soft bed nearby, along with a bowl of food and fresh water. Slowly, day by day, Charlie began to trust. He started following Emma around the house, wagging his tail whenever she spoke to him. The first time he played with a toy, he was confused at first, but soon he was pouncing and chasing it with delight. He learned the joy of chasing butterflies in the garden, of feeling the sun on his fur, of curling up beside Emma on the couch, resting his head on her lap. One night, as they sat together watching the snowfall outside, Emma whispered, "You were meant to be here, Charlie." The little puppy looked up at her, his eyes filled with love and gratitude.
A love that changed everything.
As the weeks passed, Charlie transformed into a lively, happy dog. No longer was he the frail puppy left to die in the cold. His once weak legs were now strong, his eyes sparkled with life, and his golden fur shone in the sunlight. One evening, as Emma sat reading a book, Charlie climbed onto the couch beside her, resting his head on her lap. She smiled, running her fingers through his fur. "I wonder what would have happened if I had walked past that night," she mused aloud. But deep down, she already knew the answer. If she had ignored him like everyone else, Charlie wouldn't have survived. But she didn't walk past. She stopped. She cared. And because of that, Charlie got his second chance. From that moment on, he was no longer alone. He had a home, he had a family, and most importantly, he had love.